Hey guys, tonight we slip back to a world before alarm clocks, before coffee makers, before TikTok, and even before indoor plumbing. We're headed straight into the chapped, calloused hands of history, into the cold, dirt-floored cottage of a medieval farmer and his wife. Imagine the air is so crisp you could snap it in half. Dawn isn't pink and pretty, it's more of a grey suggestion at the window. You're still curled under a rough wool blanket that's definitely seen better days, when the only thing standing between you and frostbite is your spouse's shivering form beside you and a thin layer of whatever dreams were left over from the night. This isn't a world designed for comfort. In fact, you probably won't survive this, but at least you'll have a story to tell. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 am? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together here on Timeless Sleep. The morning never truly starts with a sunbeam. It starts with the ache in your bones and the cough from your wife, the telltale signs of last winter still clinging to both of you, stubborn as the cobwebs in the thatch above. Your eyes crack open to the slanted shape of light, filtering through a shutter with more gaps than wood. The blanket is itchy, but not as itchy as the straw poking up through the mattress beneath you. You want to stay right here, cocooned in the dubious warmth of body heat and dreams, but you know better. If you don't move, the cold will move for you, settling into your bones until you're as frozen as the puddles outside the door. You glance over at your wife, hair tangled around her face, the hint of a smile at the corner of her lips, or maybe it's a grimace. Hard to tell at this hour. You try not to disturb her as you wiggle out from under the blanket, but the bed creaks, a slow, loud complaint that surely wakes the dead and anyone else nearby. You wince. No use. She blinks awake, eyes meeting yours, and there's a moment of shared dread at what comes next. Your feet hit the packed dirt floor, and for a second, you forget just how cold it is. Then you remember. The cold finds every gap in your patched shirt, seeps through the holes in your woolen socks, and bites your toes. It's the kind of cold that doesn't so much slap you awake as threaten to take a finger if you don't get moving. You shuffle toward the wall, where your shoes, if they can still be called that, wait, leather stiff with yesterday's mud. You stuff your feet inside, wriggling your toes in an attempt to wake them from their frosty stupor. The room is a study in browns and greys. The beams above are crooked, bowed under years of thatch, smoke, and perhaps a few too many squirrels with questionable morals. One of the beams has a suspicious stain on it, and you make a mental note, as you do every morning, to finally check what that is. Though in truth, you'll never get around to it. You pad over to the hearth, a rough stone affair set into the end of the cottage. The fire has gone out in the night, as it does most nights, and now only a few sullen coals sulk under the grey ash. You kneel, rubbing your hands together, and poke at the embers with a stick. Your breath, misty and white, mingles with the curl of smoke that drifts up as you coax the fire back to life. Sometimes you wish for magic, a snap of the fingers, a whispered word, and warmth would return. Instead, you settle for kindling, dry twigs, a handful of moss, and a prayer to whichever saint has jurisdiction over early risers. As you work, your wife sits up, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. She offers you a sleepy smile, or maybe it's just her teeth chattering. "You got it going?" she asks, voice croaky as a morning frog. You grunt, shaking the stick at the coals. Almost. If this moss ever decides to be useful, she stands, feet bare, brave against the cold, and rummages in a basket for yesterday's crusts of bread, which she will later soften with broth. Behind her, the window leaks a faint, reluctant light, promising another day of work, and probably rain, but who's counting? At last a reluctant flame licks at the twigs, then jumps greedily to a dry branch. You add another, gently, like cradling a newborn. The smoke sneaks out the crooked chimney, leaving a whiff of burnt moss and last night's stew. The room, if not exactly warm, is now at least less frigid. With the fire now crackling, your wife begins the morning's ritual, feeding the hearth with oats. You watch as she measures out a stingy portion. Oats are precious, every handful hard-won from fields that never seem quite generous enough. She adds water, stirs with a carved wooden spoon, and the thin porridge bubbles with a sound that's more hopeful than delicious. Your job, meanwhile, is to check on the animals. You brace yourself and unlatch the door, the wood swollen from a night of dew. It groans open, sending a flock of chickens scattering with indignant squawks. The air outside is even colder, sharp with the scent of earth, dung, and something faintly sweet, maybe the last of the apples rotting in the grass. You trudge to the chicken coop, which leans at an angle that makes you worry about the laws of physics, and toss a handful of grain into the straw. The chickens, unimpressed by your generosity, peck at your boots as if to say you could do better. One particularly bold hen gives you a look that says, "You call this breakfast?" You shrug. You and me both, love. You check the water trough, frozen of course, and chip away at the ice with the heel of your boot. The sheep, huddled together for warmth, regard you with the blank suspicion reserved for creatures who know you'll shear them come spring. The cow, Bess, watches with her wide, patient eyes as you rub her nose and promise that you'll bring her some hay as soon as you can manage. There's a routine to all of this, a rhythm older than the sagging cottage or the ancient trees that rim your field. You move from task to task in the pail, growing light, hands numb, mind still heavy with the remnants of dreams. You catch a flash of movement, a fox perhaps, slinking along the hedgerow, but it disappears before you can do more than blink. Your wife stands in the doorway, arms folded against the cold, hair wild, and shouts to remind you not to forget the eggs this time. You pretend not to hear, but she knows better. When you return inside, the porridge is ready. Steam rises from the bowl, bringing with it the ghost of real food, and you're grateful, even if you know you'll be hungry again in an hour. You eat together, hunched over the wooden table, shoulders nearly touching, the only warmth in the room coming from your bodies and the little fire you coaxed to life. You share a joke about last year's harvest, or what passed for one, and your wife laughs, the sound soft and bright in the dim room. Above your heads a spider crawls lazily along the beam, unconcerned by the dramas of those below. Somewhere in the walls a mouse scratches, perhaps plotting the next foray into your meagre stores. You'd complain, but you almost admire its persistence. Life here is about hanging on, through cold, through hunger, through the small indignities of every new dawn. You finish your meal, scrape the bowls clean with a chunk of bread, and share the last crumbs with the cat, who appears like a ghost from the shadows. The cat purrs, a low rumbling approval that's almost enough to make you forget the chill. Your wife runs her hands over her arms, rubbing warmth into the skin, and gives you a look that says, "Ready?" Ready or not, the day begins, again as it always has and always will. Your bodies move in tired unison, fetching cloaks, pulling on boots, checking and double-checking that nothing essential has been left behind. You glance back at the bed, half wishing you could slip under that rough blanket and disappear, but there is no choice. The land waits, and you belong to it, heart and hand, frostbite and all. You step outside together, the door thumping closed behind you. The air tastes of wood smoke and cold, your breath rising in twin plumes. The world is waking up. A crow calls from the barn roof, distant bells toll somewhere beyond the woods, and a neighbour's dog barks, its voice sharp and insistent. You take your wife's hand for a moment, just to squeeze, and then let go. There's work to do, and the day has only just begun. As you head toward the barn, your wife mutters about the chickens plotting revolution, and you wonder if maybe, just maybe, today will be the day the old thatched roof finally gives in and drops an entire squirrel onto your head. It would hardly be the worst thing that's happened before breakfast. But the morning, for all it's cold, is alive. Every breath you take, every ache in your bones, every squawk and bleat and shiver, a reminder that you're still here, still standing, still fighting the good fight against time, nature, and the general stubbornness of medieval farm life. The faint glow of the hearth clings to your clothes as you march through the muddy gap between the cottage and the lean-to that pretends to be a kitchen garden. Your boots suck at the sludge, cold seeping into your toes, but at least the chickens have finally stopped plotting in suspicious clusters and started bickering over grain instead. Your wife, one hand still clutching her shawl, is already crouched near the vegetable patch, muttering to herself about the root cellar and how, if she trips over another pumpkin vine this year, she'll teach the seeds a lesson they'll never forget. You watch your breath puff out in tiny clouds, white as flour, and wonder if you'll ever feel your fingertips again. At the edge of the clearing, the rooster, today's self-appointed monarch, crows with such enthusiasm that even the cow rolls her eyes. The chickens, round and feathered like furious little pillows, strut and squabble, scratching at the earth with the determination of birds, convinced that somewhere, under this exact spot, lies a treasure chest full of grain. One of the hens, the one with the missing toe and a face like she's seen too much, pecks at your boot until you lift it away. "All right, madam," you say, "take it easy. You want to swap places?" Your wife smirks from across the yard. "If you start laying eggs, you'll save us a lot of trouble." You find the humour in her words even as you trudge toward the battered rain barrel, where a thin skin of ice stretches over the water. It's your job to crack it, knuckle stinging, and fill the old kettle for the morning's second round of porridge, or whatever passes for it. You break the ice, and it fragments like the shards of a dream. You can't help but marvel at the way water, that simplest of things, becomes precious as silver when it's locked away by winter's grip. Back inside, the cottage is humming with the muffled sounds of waking life. Your wife, who's managed to keep her humour intact despite the frigid air, pours the kettle's contents into a battered pot. She stands close to the hearth, stirring with practised patience, the steam rising up and clouding her face. The children, your two youngest, still blissfully asleep on a pile of rushes, begin to stir. Their hair is wild, their faces smudged with yesterday's dirt, but their eyes shine with that untamed light of children who have not yet learned to dread the day's labour. You crouch beside them, nudging one gently. "Time to get up. Sprout," you say. The little one groans, curling into the straw. The older shrugs off the blanket and sits up, rubbing her eyes, and yawns with a jaw-cracking sound that makes your wife laugh out loud. "You'll scare the chickens with that mouth," she says, and your daughter giggles, shoulders shaking, all worries forgotten for a moment. Breakfast, such as it is a slow, communal affair. You share what you have: thin oat porridge, a hard heel of yesterday's bread, and a handful of last autumn's shriveled apples, spots of brown hidden on the inside, of course. You eat with your fingers, hunched close around the table, legs tangling underfoot. Sometimes you tell yourself it tastes better when shared, and in the warmth of this small family, you almost believe it. There's a ritual to breakfast, an order older than the house. Your wife always stirs the pot 3 times before serving, for luck, she says, though you suspect it's mostly to make sure no burned bits stick to the bottom. You always hand her the wooden bowl with the smoothest edge, because last winter she chipped a tooth on a rough one, and you're still paying for that, metaphorically, since there are no actual dentists to pay. After you eat, it's time for the morning's chaos. The children wriggle into their tunics, oversized and full of patches, their toes poking out from holes in the woolen stockings. You show them how to wrap scraps of cloth around their feet for extra warmth, and your wife helps tie their belts with a flourish, as if they're tiny knights about to go on some grand adventure instead of just chasing geese out of the cabbage. You and your wife divide up the chores with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this every day for years. She heads to the well, balancing a bucket on one hip, calling back instructions about not letting the fire die down again. Remember what happened last time, she warns, and you recall the evening spent breathing smoke and cursing the stubborn log that refused to catch. Never again, you mutter, and she grins, her breath a white ribbon in the air. Your turn with the chickens comes next. You step into the coop, boots sinking into straw and something less pleasant, and are immediately besieged by hens, convinced you've been hoarding the grain all along. You search under fluffed feathers and in dark corners for eggs, finding 3 miracles, each one, and tuck them carefully into your hat for safekeeping. The rooster eyes you with disdain, as if judging your technique. You wish you could explain to him the intricacies of rent, taxes, and the miracle of breakfast, but he wouldn't care. Back outside, you see your wife at the well, bucket swinging, face flushed from the cold. You wave, and she shouts, "Don't forget the goose," as if the bird could ever let itself be forgotten. The goose, your feathered nemesis, honks in the distance, a sound somewhere between outrage and triumph. You steel yourself, approach the goose, and remember last week's bite, the bruise on your hand still visible, a small price for the honour of sharing space with a bird that believes itself a dragon. With as much dignity as you can muster, you shoo the goose away from the door, trying not to look foolish as it hisses and flaps its wings. Your children watch from a safe distance, cheering you on, because nothing says good parenting like providing entertainment at your own expense. The sun has climbed a little higher now, brushing the tops of the trees with hesitant gold. Your wife returns with the water, sets it near the hearth, and wipes her brow with the edge of her sleeve. That well's deeper every year, she sighs, and you nod. The land is old, and so are you sometimes. Inside, the chores never stop. Your wife kneads dough for the midday bread, her hands working the flour with a rhythm as old as language. You help by fetching more wood for the fire, stacking it in the corner, and brushing off the occasional spider that tries to hitch a ride. There's a satisfaction in the small accomplishments, a fire that burns steady, dough that rises, a table cleared of crumbs, even if only for a moment. You glance outside and see your neighbour trudging up the path, his cap pulled low, cheeks red from the cold. He raises a hand in greeting, and you nod back. The neighbour's news is usually nothing good. Someone's pig escaped, or the miller's wife saw a ghost, or the priest is coming to collect tithes, but it's always news, and in a world where surprises are rare. Even bad news is something to talk about. You meet him at the fence, exchanging polite grumbles about the weather. Colder than a witch's heart, he mutters, and you agree, though you've never met a witch, and hope to keep it that way. He tells you about the frost that killed the last of his beans, and you share the story of the mysterious footprints in your garden, which you suspect belong to a particularly bold hedgehog, or, if your wife is to be believed, a mischievous sprite. He laughs, claps you on the shoulder and heads off, leaving you with the pleasant ache of conversation, and the knowledge that you're not the only one fighting the good fight against the elements. Inside, your wife's laughter drifts from the hearth, where the children are playing a game involving spoons, pebbles and rules that seem to change every time you look away. You step inside, shaking the cold from your shoulders, and join the chaos, helping your wife carry the dough to the oven, an ancient stone structure at the edge of the yard that's more temperamental than the goose. You feed the fire, wait for the right heat, and slide the loaf inside, whispering a quick prayer to Saint Honoratus, the patron saint of bakers, because you'll take help where you can get it. There's a lull in the work, a rare moment when the house is quiet and the world seems to pause. You look at your wife, hair dusted with flour, face flushed from the heat of the oven, and think, not for the first time, that there's a kind of beauty in this life. Not an easy beauty, not the kind you find in stories, but a real, hard-won grace that comes from surviving, from laughing in the cold, from sharing bread and burden alike. You take her hand, just for a moment, and she squeezes back, eyes twinkling. The children, momentarily still, watch with wide grins, and the sun pushes through the clouds, painting the cottage in a soft, forgiving light. But the peace never lasts. The goose honks again, the rooster crows, and somewhere in the distance, a cow bellows, demanding attention. Your wife sighs, brushes a strand of hair from her face, and says, "Back to it then." You nod, stepping outside into the busy world, heart a little lighter, hands already bracing for the next cold bucket, the next hungry mouth, the next small, stubborn victory. There's nothing easy about this life. But there's humour in it too, in the chicken's plotting, the goose's tyranny, the bread that rises when it shouldn't, and the company of someone who shares both your jokes and your aches. The fire pops, the children laugh, and you remember, this is home, strange and stubborn and alive. The bread is still baking when you step back into the yard, and the cold greets you like an old enemy who never truly leaves. The brief softness of shared laughter fades as the next round of chores presses in. Morning in a medieval village does not unfold gently, it arrives with expectations. The animals must be tended before the sun climbs too high, and the fields won't plough themselves, tragically. You head first to Bess, your patient, long-suffering cow. She stands in the small byre beside the cottage, her breath rising in thick clouds, tail flicking lazily as if she has all the time in the world. You, on the other hand, do not. You set down the wooden stool and press your forehead briefly against her flank, partly for warmth, partly in gratitude. Milk is life here. Milk becomes butter, cheese, and something resembling comfort in winter months when crops fail. Without her, your table would look even lonelier. Your wife joins you, sleeves rolled, hands already pink from the cold. She carries the wooden pail, its rim slightly cracked but still trustworthy. Milking requires rhythm, patience, and a kind of quiet conversation between human and beast. You crouch low, resting your head against Bess's side as your wife begins the steady squeeze and release that produces the warm hiss of milk hitting the pail. Steam curls upward, fragrant and oddly sweet. You take over halfway through, your fingers stiff but determined. The milk foams gently at the surface. You think about how, in many villages like yours, dairy is one of the few steady sources of nourishment. Grain harvests can fail, storms can flatten barley, but a good cow, if she stays healthy, carries you through. It's a practical blessing, far more reliable than the charm some neighbours tie around their fences to ward off misfortune. Still, even you carry a small talisman tucked in your tunic, a smooth stone your mother once claimed would keep illness away. You don't entirely believe in it, but you also don't dare throw it out. When half the village once swore that placing a horseshoe over the door would confuse evil spirits, you hammered one up without argument. There are enough real dangers without tempting imaginary ones. Milk secured, you strain it through a cloth your wife stitched from worn linen scraps. She nods approvingly at the yield. "Not bad," she murmurs, which in her language is high praise. The children peer from the doorway, hopeful for a sip. You pretend not to notice until your wife rolls her eyes and hands them each a small cup. They drink quickly, white moustaches forming, grinning as if they've tasted royal wine. Next comes the sheep. They huddle together near the fence, thick wool matted from damp air. You inspect them for signs of illness. Livestock disease can spread quickly, and when it does, it's ruthless. A sick sheep means less wool to trade, less meat when winter deepens. You run your hands along their backs, checking for injuries, murmuring reassurance in a voice you didn't know you possessed until animals demanded it. Your wife moves toward the small herb patch near the cottage wall. Even in cold months, a few hardy plants cling to life, sage, thyme, and a stubborn sprig of rosemary. She clips what she can. explaining that she'll dry some near the hearth. Herbs do more than flavour food, they stand in for medicine. Sage for sore throats, thyme steeped for coughs. In villages like yours, the line between cook and healer is thin, and your wife walks it daily. A sharp cry splits the air. One of the children has slipped near the water trough. You rush over, heart leaping, but it's only pride that's bruised. Your daughter scrambles up, cheeks flushed with embarrassment rather than pain. Your wife kneels to check her ankle anyway, hands gentle but firm. "We don't need any broken bones today," she mutters. There's no village physician within easy reach, and even if there were, payment would likely come in grain or labour you can't spare. With animals settled, you and your wife turn to the heavier task waiting beyond the cottage, hauling water and splitting wood. Firewood is survival itself. Without it, the hearth goes dark, bread stays dough, and nights become unbearable. You carry the axe over your shoulder, stepping toward the woodpile. Each swing sends a shock up your arms, splitting logs into manageable pieces. The rhythm is steady: raise, strike, crack. Raise, strike, crack. Your wife stacks the split wood carefully, aligning each piece so air can circulate and dry the damp edges. She works with methodical focus. Wood that's too wet smokes terribly, filling the cottage with choking clouds. You learnt that lesson last winter when an entire evening vanished into coughing fits and frantic waving of cloaks. A thin sunbeam breaks through clouds, illuminating the frost still clinging to the grass. For a moment, the field looks almost enchanted. You remember hearing from a travelling peddler that some distant lands have climates so warm olives grow year-round. The thought feels absurd. You can't imagine a world where frost isn't a constant adversary. You pause to stretch your back. Labour is unrelenting here. Medieval farmers like you work from sunrise to sunset most days, especially in growing seasons. There are feast days and church holidays when work pauses, but even then, animals don't respect holy calendars. They still need feeding. Your wife calls you over to inspect the chicken coop again. A gap in the fence has widened. "Fox," she says simply. You nod. Predators are clever and patient. Losing hens means losing eggs, and eggs are small miracles. You fetch spare wood and hammer the boards back into place, securing them with nails you traded for at market months ago. Each nail is precious. You measure their use carefully. As you work, your wife recounts something she heard from the neighbour's wife, that leaving crumbs on the doorstep invites wandering spirits. You glance at the doorstep, where crumbs from breakfast still linger. Without comment, you brush them away with your boot. There's no harm in caution. By midday, your muscles hum with fatigue. The bread from earlier is ready, its crust browned and fragrant. Your wife retrieves it from the oven with a cloth-wrapped hand, steam bursting from the split top. You tear a small piece while it's still warm, savouring the softness. Fresh bread feels like wealth, but rest is brief. There's still the matter of fetching more water before dusk, mending a loose shutter, and checking the plough stored near the barn. You head there now, inspecting the wooden beam and iron tip. The plough is your partner in survival. In spring, it will carve furrows into stubborn soil. Today you check for cracks and rust, oiling the metal lightly to prevent decay. Your wife joins you, brushing straw from her skirt. She leans against the barn wall, studying the sky. Clouds are thickening, she observes. Weather dictates everything. A sudden storm can undo weeks of effort. You nod, committing the sight to memory. The children chase each other around the yard, laughter ringing out. You watch them for a moment, marvelling at how easily joy appears even in a life defined by toil. Your wife steps closer, slipping her hand into yours. The gesture is brief, practical, yet filled with meaning. In a world where survival depends on cooperation, affection becomes woven into daily labour. A distant church bell tolls faintly across the fields, marking the hour. Its sound carries authority, reminding you of obligations beyond your own fence, tithes owed, duties to lord and parish. But for now, the bell is only a sound on the wind. You draw in a slow breath. The day is far from over, but the rhythm has settled into something steady. Work done, work ahead, always balanced on the edge of weather and fortune. Beside you, your wife adjusts her shawl and nods toward the house. "Come," she says softly, "before the next thing breaks," and in this life, something always does. You turn toward the field, boots heavy with a mixture of mud and manure, and the old wooden plough waits just beyond the barn, its iron tip dulled from years of carving lines into stubborn earth. This is the muscle of your existence, the thing that stands between your family and hunger, more vital than even the rooster's alarm or the crackle of the hearth. The oxen, snorting and flicking their ears, seem to sense the day's work ahead. They don't rush. Animals rarely do, but you envy their steady certainty, the way they chew cud as if the coming hours hold nothing but grass and patience. Your wife walks at your side, her skirt hiked just enough to clear the worst of the muck, balancing the plough's harness across her shoulder. She grumbles about the state of your boots, holes in the left, split seam in the right, but you both know there are no replacements coming unless you patch them yourself. She laughs, low and easy, at the sight of your socks poking through, and you promise for the 100th time that you'll fix them tonight. You've said it before. The list of things to mend always grows longer than your hours. Together, you yoke the oxen, leather straps slick with morning dew. The beasts are broad and patient, their breath steaming in the air. You murmur encouragements, familiar words that have little meaning except as ritual, and one ox turns its great brown eye toward you, as if considering whether you deserve its cooperation. "Let's not have another repeat of last spring," your wife warns, referencing the time one ox decided to sit mid-furrow for an entire hour, unmoved by bribes, threats, or gentle persuasion. You pat the animal's side and hope it's feeling charitable today. The first cut of the plough into the earth is always the hardest. The soil clings, thick and sticky, still recovering from winter's grip. Your hands tighten on the handles as you push, shoulders straining, the oxen plodding ahead with a reluctant, inexorable power. The ploughshare shudders over a hidden stone, jolting your arms all the way to the bone. You grit your teeth, adjust your grip, and press on, carving a crooked furrow that you hope will straighten with practice, or at least with fewer rocks. Your wife walks beside you, her sharp eyes scanning the line, calling out when you drift or stumble. You grumble back at her corrections, but secretly you know she's right. A chill breeze whips across the field, tugging at your cap and swirling the scent of earth and old leaves. The world is alive with tiny sounds, the squelch of mud, the low grunt of the oxen, the distant gossip of crows perched atop the hedgerow. Somewhere a dog barks, a neighbour's perhaps, warning off a fox or just making conversation with the world. You take a moment to catch your breath, leaning on the plough, and watch your wife tackle a patch of nettles near the edge of the field. She works with a stick, hands nimble, flicking the stinging leaves aside and muttering about the time a neighbour tried boiling nettles for soup. The experiment ended with a rash and a lingering bitterness neither of you will soon forget. You coax the oxen onward, guiding them with a soft call and a tug on the reins. The plough sinks a little deeper, slicing through sodden turf. As the furrow grows, you can see the history of the land written in the soil, darker where last year's compost went in, lighter where the sun baked it dry. Every stone you turn up is a minor discovery, and you pause now and then to heave the larger ones to the field's edge. Some days you think the earth grows rocks as a form of entertainment, just to keep you humble. Your wife comes over, rubbing her arms for warmth. She's carrying a basket with tools, a spade, a rusted hoe, and a few bits of twine for tying up wayward saplings. She kneels beside a muddy ditch, digging with the spade, searching for the source of a persistent trickle that's been threatening to flood your potato patch. Her hair falls in her eyes, and she tucks it back, leaving a streak of mud across her cheek. She looks up, sees you watching, and winks. If you see an eel, shout, she says. Last time, it nearly slipped into my boot. The thought makes you shudder. The ditches in these fields are home to all sorts of surprises, frogs, water beetles, and once, as your wife never lets you forget, a very indignant eel. The sun climbs higher, though it brings little warmth. Your arms ache, sweat beading on your brow despite the chill. You switch places, handing the plough to your wife, who makes a face at the weight but sets to work with her usual stubborn determination. You take the basket and turn your attention to a patch of thistles invading the edge of the beans. With the hoe, you hack and pull, tossing the prickly weeds into a growing pile. Every year, they come back, no matter how thorough you are. Sometimes you joke that if you ever give up on farming, you'll make your fortune selling thistle crowns to the local lord. By midday, you've managed a few wonky furrows and a slightly less flooded ditch. Your wife stands beside you, both of you muddy to the knees, breathing hard but smiling. There's pride in this work, even when it feels endless. You sit on the grass for a moment, legs stretched out, sharing a battered water jug and a chunk of hard cheese you managed to save from last market. The cheese is sharp, almost sour, but you both agree it's better than nothing. You talk, as you often do, about the things you wish for. More land, maybe, or a stronger plough, or shoes that don't let in every puddle. You wonder aloud if next year the harvest will be better, and your wife snorts. Next year's always better, she says, until it isn't. You both laugh, not because it's funny, but because what else can you do? Rest doesn't last. The sun, indifferent to your aches, keeps moving, and soon it's time to bring the oxen in for water. You guide them back to the trough, where your daughter is waiting with a bucket nearly as big as she is. She pours with great ceremony, splashing half of it on her boots, and the oxen lap up the rest, content as kings. Your wife checks their hooves for stones, murmuring softly to them, and you marvel again at how animals trust her so easily. With the worst of the ploughing done for the day, you turn to mending the fence along the field's edge. A gap has opened up, likely from last night's wind, and you hammer in fresh stakes, tying them together with lengths of twisted willow. Your wife helps, her hands deft, her eyes quick to spot weak points. The fence isn't pretty, but it should hold for now. As you work, you share stories, some true, some less so, about the people who've walked this land before you. A farmer who once grew beans so tall he had to cut holes in the roof. A woman who baked bread so hard it was used as a doorstop. Your wife rolls her eyes at these tales, but you see the corners of her mouth twitch with amusement. Afternoon deepens, and with it comes the first hint of rain. A smell on the wind, a dampness in the air. You hurry to finish, gathering tools and shooing the chickens back toward the coop. They protest, flapping and squawking, but eventually surrender to your wife's stern command. You both stand in the doorway, mud-splattered and tired, watching as clouds gather overhead. There's a satisfaction in the work, even if your hands are raw and your shoulders ache. You did what needed doing. You kept the world from falling apart for one more day. As you turn to go inside, your wife pauses, glancing back at the fields. "We'll need to check the beans tomorrow," she says, "and the nettles are spreading again." You nod, knowing the list will only grow. Still, there's a quiet pride in facing the tasks together, in the knowledge that whatever comes, you'll meet it side by side. Back in the cottage, you peel off your muddy boots and collapse onto the bench by the fire. Your wife joins you, settling in with a sigh, and for a moment you simply sit in companionable silence, listening to the rain tap against the roof and the wind rattle the shutters. You glance down at your hands, blistered and rough, and realise they're not so different from your father's, or his father's before him. This life, hard as it is, binds generations together in shared struggle, shared laughter, and the stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, next year will be kinder. You don't have long to enjoy the warmth. A sharp rap at the door pulls you up from your seat, and your wife glances at you, both of you wearing the same resigned expression. Visitors rarely arrive with gifts, unless you count gossip, and even then the exchange is rarely balanced. You pull open the heavy oak door, hinges creaking their usual protest, and find Tom from the next farm standing there, cap in hand, mud up to his knees and a crooked grin on his face. "Morning," Tom says, though the sun has barely crested the trees. "Just passing through. Wife sent me to borrow a bit of yeast if you've any to spare." His voice is casual, but his eyes flit inside, searching for something more. Perhaps a crumb of news, or a glimpse of your last batch of bread. You motion him in, and the warmth of the fire, modest as it is, draws him over like a moth. Your wife greets him with a nod and a measured smile, rising to fetch the earthenware pot where she keeps her precious yeast. It's a meagre supply, carefully coaxed from the last batch, and she doles out a bit with a practised hand. "Return the favour next bake, mind," she warns, and Tom swears on his mother's grave he will. You all know how it goes. A favour traded is a favour returned. Or at least that's the story you tell. Tom settles on the edge of the bench, pulling his boots off with a grunt, and for a moment the three of you pass time in the subtle, unsaid ways that neighbours do. You ask about his youngest, who's been coughing, and he replies that the child's on the mend, thanks to your wife's time tea and, perhaps, the charm she tucked beneath his pillow. Your wife feigns indifference, but there's a flicker of pride in her eyes. Then Tom launches into the real business of the morning. News, rumours, and a little bit of well-aimed mischief. "Did you hear about old John and the blacksmith's mare?" Tom asks, leaning in conspiratorially. Swore he saw her leaping the fence in the moonlight, as if the devil himself was chasing her. Says she's bewitched, but I say he's just jealous he hasn't got a horse worth the trouble. Your wife laughs, the sound rich and real, and you find yourself smiling in spite of yourself. You tell Tom about the fox you suspect has been lurking near the chicken coop, and he offers a few colourful suggestions for traps, some useful, some clearly invented on the spot for your entertainment. As the minutes slip by, the conversation turns to more serious matters, crop failures rumoured from the next village, talk of the miller raising his prices again, and whispers that the Lord's steward has been seen counting sheep in the fields, tallying rents. You all shake your heads at this last bit. The steward is always watching, always listening, and his sudden interest never bodes well for anyone but the Lord. Tom stands to leave, tucking the lump of yeast into his coat. Your wife hands him a small loaf, barely more than a crust, but Tom accepts it with a grateful nod. You hear anything from the South Road, you send word, he says, voice lower now. You promise you will, and as he steps outside, he hesitates. "Oh, and watch yourself with Agnes," he adds. "She's got her eye on your beans, or so they say." He winks, then disappears down the path, leaving muddy footprints and a whiff of wood smoke behind. You shut the door, leaning against it for a moment, and your wife shakes her head with a sigh. "Beans?" she mutters, as if anyone would bother with ours. But you both know better. Beans are beans, and in lean years every handful counts. You remember a time, not so long ago, when someone stole turnips from the far field. The culprit was never caught, though suspicion circled for months, landing on everyone and no one in equal measure. Forgiveness is a flexible thing here, stretched by need, snapped by greed. The children, sensing a break in the routine, sidle over. You ruffle your son's hair and tell him to keep an eye out for anyone skulking near the bean patch. He takes his duties seriously, brandishing a stick and marching out with his sister in tow. You watch them go, a smile flickering on your lips. They're young yet, but they learn fast. Life teaches you to keep your eyes open and your mouth shut, at least around grown-ups. Your wife returns to her chores, humming under her breath, and you take the chance to check on the stores, what little remains in the cellar and what might be traded with neighbours. Root vegetables, onions strung from the rafters, a dwindling bag of salt. You count it all, lips moving silently, and make a mental note to barter for more salt when the chance comes. Salt is life, more precious than silver some days, and you've heard stories of entire villages going without when a river floods or a lord raises tolls on the salt road. Midday approaches, and with it comes a cluster of neighbours trudging up the lane, Mary with her giggle, Will with his perpetual scowl, and Agnes, who does indeed cast a covetous eye toward your bean rows. You invite them in, sharing what you can, the last of the morning bread, a bowl of thin soup, a few slices of apple dried last autumn, and a scrap of cheese if you're feeling generous. The talk is lively, the laughter punctuated by the occasional sharp barb, Mary teasing Will about his missing boot, Agnes boasting about her new goose, Will muttering about the bailiff's latest demands. Gossip is traded as currency, and no one is immune. Someone mentions the priest's recent sermon, how he railed against the sins of sloth and vanity, though everyone knows he naps behind the altar and owns a feather pillow softer than any in the village. Your wife shares a tidbit about a peddler who passed through last week, offering ribbons and honey cakes, but charging double what they're worth. He said they came all the way from London, she scoffs, but I could taste the meadow in them. The neighbours laugh, knowing full well that London is just another word for expensive. Yet beneath the jokes and jabs runs a current of real concern. The harvest was thin this year, and everyone feels the pinch. Agnes worries aloud about her chickens going broody before she's got enough eggs for the next tithe. Will grumbles about wolves in the woods, and Mary says she's seen strange lights near the old mill. Will-o'-the-wisps, she claims, spirits that lure travellers into the marsh. You share your own story, about the time you heard voices in the fog, only to discover it was a pair of drunken farmhands arguing over a lost shoe. Disputes simmer, as they always do. Someone mentions the feud between old Martin and his brother, how it began over a broken scythe, and ended with Martin refusing to attend the christening of his niece. No one remembers the details, but the story is told and retold, changing a little each time, growing sharper at the edges. You listen, offering the occasional word, careful never to take sides. You've learned, through years of muddy boots and mended fences, that it's best to be seen as helpful but not involved, friendly but never foolish. As the afternoon light slants across the floor, the neighbours take their leave, heading back to their own chores and squabbles. Your wife closes the door with a soft click, the house quiet again. She sits beside you, tired but content, and you both listen to the fading sounds of voices drifting down the lane. The visit has left you with a handful of news, a crumb of bread less than before, and a feeling of connection that lingers long after the laughter fades. You tidy up, sweeping crumbs into the fire and setting aside the chipped bowls for mending. Your wife checks the larder once more, making a note of what must last until market day. You plan out the evening, a bit of spinning perhaps, or patching the roof if the weather holds. There's always more to do, but for a brief moment the weight of the day feels lighter, shared among friends and rivals alike. Outside, the sun dips lower and the shadows stretch across the yard. You step out, breathing in the cool air, and look across the fields to where your neighbours' cottages dot the landscape. Smoke rises from their chimneys, mingling with the dusk, and you wonder what stories are being told around their fires tonight. Maybe tales of you and your wife, hard-working and stubborn, or maybe just a passing mention of the day's gossip, beans, bread, and the ever-present threat of rain. You head back inside, the door closing with a satisfying thud, and your wife gives you a wry smile. Tomorrow, she says, we'll need to check the fence by the road. Will says he saw footprints there, not human. Big ones. You raise an eyebrow, but she only shrugs. Could be a wolf. Or Agnes in her new boots. You both laugh, the sound filling the cottage, warm and bright against the coming night. The laughter from the neighbours is still echoing faintly when your stomach rumbles, a low, persistent reminder that all the gossip and good cheer in the world can't fill an empty belly. Lunch in your world isn't much of a feast, more a pause. a chance to scrape together what's left from the morning's labour and hope it carries you through the rest of the day. You and your wife sit at the table, elbows nearly touching, as she ladles out thin stew from the pot simmering over the hearth. It's little more than broth, flecked with cabbage and the occasional sliver of carrot. You spot a scrap of pork floating near the top and wonder if it's the last you'll see for a week. Bread is, as ever, the main event, or what passes for it anyway. The loaf, baked earlier, is mostly crust, hard and chewy, the sort you have to soak in the stew before it becomes anything close to edible. Your wife breaks hers with a practised hand, dipping it into the bowl and holding it up with a triumphant grin, as if she's discovered a new delicacy. Best in the Shire, she declares, and you both chuckle, the joke older than your eldest child. You chew, slow and deliberate, feeling each bite as it makes its way down. Hunger adds flavour, that's for certain. You savour every crumb, careful not to drop any on the rushes below. The cat, ever the optimist, prowls beneath the table, tail swishing, ready to pounce on the smallest morsel. You nudge a crust in her direction, and she accepts it with regal dignity, as if you've presented her with a roast pheasant. Your wife leans back, bowl cradled in her hands, and sighs. "Remember when we had those honey cakes?" she asks, half dreaming. You do remember one glorious harvest festival, years ago, when sugar was cheap and someone's cousin brought honey from the next village over. You ate until your stomach hurt, and for days afterward the world seemed a little sweeter. Now, sugar is a luxury you only see on holy days, and honey is guarded like treasure. "Next time," you say, and she laughs, nudging you under the table. Always next time. The words hang in the air, somewhere between hope and habit. The children return, cheeks flushed from chasing each other through the yard. They pile onto the bench beside you, eyes bright as they sniff the air. You dole out smaller portions for them, careful to leave enough for supper. They eat with noisy enthusiasm, slurping the broth and licking the bowls clean. You listen to their chatter, stories of imagined dragons in the woods, arguments over who won the race, plans for secret forts beneath the hawthorn tree. Their world is small, but it's filled with adventure. After the meal, you clear the table, scraping the bowls clean and setting them aside for washing. Your wife wipes the table with a damp cloth, careful to collect every last crumb. Nothing is wasted, not here. You gather the leftovers, a few soggy crusts, a bit of stew, and tuck them away for later. The cat eyes the pot, hoping for seconds, but your wife shoos her away with a gentle flick of her hand. With the meal finished, your wife turns her attention to spinning wool. She sits by the fire, spindle in hand, twisting the coarse fibres into thread. Her movements are steady, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You watch her for a moment, admiring the way she works, fingers nimble, eyes focused, lips moving as she counts the turns. It's a skill passed down through generations, as essential as breathing. You take up your own task, mending a wooden rake whose tines have come loose. With a bit of twine and a steady hand, you bind them back into place. It's slow work, but satisfying. Every tool you repair is one less you'll need to barter for at the market, one less coin slipping through your fingers. You hum to yourself, a tune half remembered from your childhood, and the simple act of making do feels almost like defiance. The afternoon sun slips through the cracks in the shutters, casting dappled light across the floor. Outside, you can hear the distant clatter of a wagon, the calls of birds in the hedgerow, the lowing of cattle in the neighbouring field. It's peaceful, in its way, a lull between storms, a moment to breathe. Your wife glances up from her spinning, a twinkle in her eye. "Think we'll have enough wool for a new blanket this winter?" she asks. You shrug, unwilling to make promises you might not keep. If the sheep behave, you reply, and she laughs, knowing full well that sheep are as contrary as the weather. You share stories as you work, tales of childhood mischief, old legends whispered by the hearth, and the ever-popular saga of your infamous turnip stew. Your wife never lets you forget that particular disaster, a meal so bland it was memorable only for its stubborn refusal to taste like anything at all. You could have poisoned the rats with that stew, she teases, and you bow your head in mock shame. The conversation drifts, touching on everything and nothing. You talk about the coming market, wondering if the cheese will be as good as last year. Your wife hopes for apples, though the late frost means they'll be scarce. You discuss the priest's sermon, the neighbour's new fence, the rumour that the Lord's daughter is to be wed to a distant noble. News travels slowly here, carried on the wind and shaped by a dozen tongues before it reaches your door. As the day wears on, hunger fades into a distant ache, replaced by the comfort of routine. You finish mending the rake, setting it aside with a sense of quiet pride. Your wife winds the last of the thread onto her spindle, setting it with the others in a neat row by the hearth. The children grow restless, chasing each other around the table until your wife sends them outside with strict orders not to return covered in mud. You step out onto the threshold, stretching your back, and watch as they disappear into the golden haze of afternoon. The world is small here, bounded by fields and fences, but it feels vast when you see it through their eyes. You wonder, not for the first time, what lies beyond the hills, the sea perhaps, or a city full of wonders. For now, though, the adventure is enough. Back inside, your wife begins to tidy up, sweeping the floor with a worn broom. You help, gathering kindling for the evening fire, stacking it neatly by the hearth. The routine is familiar, comforting. You know every creak of the floorboards, every draught that slips through the cracks, every shadow that dances on the walls. It's not much, but it's yours. A knock at the window startles you, and you turn to see your neighbour's youngest, hair wild, face flushed, waving a scrap of cloth. She's come to trade, an apple, a real one, in exchange for a handful of your wife's dried sage. You invite her in, and the exchange is made with solemn ceremony, as if you're bartering for gold. The apple is small and bruised, but it's sweet, and you divide it into careful slices, savouring each bite. Your wife sets aside a piece for the cat, who accepts it with a sniff and a twitch of her whiskers. The children return, muddy but grinning, and you scold them gently before pulling them close, brushing the dirt from their faces. It's a good day. As days go, work done, bellies mostly full, laughter lingering in the air. As evening approaches, you gather for supper, sharing the last of the stew and the few remaining crusts. You tell a story, embellishing the details for the children's delight, and your wife adds her own flourishes, talk of kings and dragons, magic beans and golden geese. The children listen, wide-eyed, their worries forgotten for a while. Afterwards, you tuck them into their bed of straw, whispering blessings and promises of dreams filled with adventure. You and your wife sit by the fire, sharing a rare moment of quiet. She leans against your shoulder, and you rest your hand over hers, fingers entwined. The fire crackles, casting shadows on the walls, and for a moment you let yourself believe that everything will be all right. You close your eyes, listening to the sounds of the cottage, the soft breathing of the children, the purr of the cat, the gentle hiss of the fire. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters, but you're warm, together, and that's enough. The peace of evening is a fragile thing, and it never seems to last long in your cottage. No sooner have the children settled, and the last spoon clinked against the rim of a bowl than chaos comes knocking, in this case, wearing horns and a muddy tail. A sudden thump against the side of the house makes you sit up straight, heart jumping, and your wife is already halfway to the door, apron flapping, before you're out of your chair. You know the sound all too well. Bess, your cow, has managed to push open the gate again, no doubt lured by the scent of greener grass just beyond the hedge, or, as you suspect, by a secret desire to ruin your quiet. You throw on your cloak and step outside, the cold immediately sinking through your shirt. The sun has dropped below the trees, leaving only a bruise of colour on the horizon and a lingering dampness in the air. You squint into the gloom and spot Bess ambling determinedly across the yard, her slow, lumbering walk somehow full of purpose. She stops to munch a stray cabbage leaf and flicks her tail at the chickens, who scatter with alarmed clucks. Your wife follows you, feet bare, muttering about troublemakers in the family, as she grabs a length of rope from beside the door. The chase is on. You circle wide, arms out, trying to outsmart a cow who seems to know every trick in the book. Bess dodges you, heading straight for the neighbour's vegetable patch, and your wife has to cut her off at the gate. Together you manage to steer her back toward the yard, the cow bellowing in protest the whole time. The commotion brings the children to the window, their faces pressed to the glass, laughter muffled by the pain. You finally corner Bess by the old pear tree, looping the rope around her horns and giving her a stern look. "That's enough, old girl," you say, and your wife rubs her nose with surprising gentleness. Back where you belong. You lead her back to the pen, checking the gate for the third time this week. You wedge it shut with a new length of wood, promising yourself you'll fix it properly tomorrow. As you work, you notice the tiny footprints of a fox near the edge of the fence, a reminder that you're not the only one interested in what's behind the gate. Your wife tosses a wary glance at the trees, muttering a quiet warning about foxes and their cleverness, and you nod, filing it away with the endless list of things to worry about. With Bess secured, you return to the yard, boots squelching in the soft ground. The children have slipped outside again, eager to see the aftermath. Your youngest picks up a feather, inspecting it with the seriousness of a scholar. "Magic?" she asks, and your wife shrugs, a playful glint in her eye. "Maybe. Or maybe just a chicken with dreams of flying." The laughter comes easily, warming the space between you, even as the night deepens. There's still work to do, of course. The animals need a final check, and your wife sets about gathering eggs from the nesting boxes, hands steady in the half-dark. You fetch fresh hay for the sheep, pausing to scratch behind their ears and check their wool for burrs and thorns. You remember tales from your own childhood, how people believed a red thread tied in a sheep's fleece would ward off evil spirits or a bad lambing season. Your wife, more practical than most, humours such things only halfway, but tonight you find her tying a bit of red yarn in the oldest ew's coat. "Can't hurt," she murmurs, and you say nothing, only watch as she works. The moon has risen now, silvering the fields and casting long shadows that move as the wind stirs the grass. You hear the distant bark of a dog, a signal that someone else is tending their animals, and you feel the odd comfort that comes from knowing you're not alone in your routine. All around, in cottages and barns, your neighbours are closing up for the night, muttering the same warnings to their livestock, checking doors and counting chickens. As you work, your mind wanders to the strange things people believe in the village, the odd superstitions that weave through daily life like threads in a tapestry. Your wife once told you never to cross the boundary stone in the north field after sunset, for fear of disturbing the fairy folk said to dance there. A neighbour's wife leaves bread on the windowsill each night for the spirits, and the old man by the stream swears his rheumatism gets worse every time he forgets to toss salt over his left shoulder. You've always been sceptical, but there are nights when the wind sounds almost like voices and the shadows in the head shift, just so, and you catch yourself moving a little faster, eyes fixed on the reassuring glow of your own hearth. You finish up outside, making sure every latch is secure, every animal accounted for. Your wife calls you to the herb patch, where she's found evidence of rabbits, nibbled leaves and tiny droppings scattered near the rosemary. She curses softly and sets a few crude snares, a trick she learned from her mother. She whispers to you about the importance of not disturbing the ring of mushrooms growing at the base of the hawthorn tree, just in case. You nod, not entirely convinced, but respectful of her certainty. After all, she's been right more often than not. Inside, the children are already drowsy, curled up together on their pallet near the fire. You add another log to the hearth, watching as the flames leap and settle, casting a golden glow that chases the worst of the night away. Your wife pours a little milk into a cup for the youngest, who drinks it sleepily, eyes half closed. The eldest picks up her spindle, determined to finish just one more length of thread before bed, but soon her eyelids droop and she gives in to the pull of sleep. You sit beside your wife, feet stretched toward the fire, and listen as she tells a story about the old days, a time when people believed animals could talk on Christmas Eve, and cows would kneel to honour the birth of Christ. She weaves the tale with a skill that comes from years of practice, her voice soft and steady, rising and falling with the rhythm of the flames. You add your own embellishments, how the fox once outwitted the village dogs, or how the cleverest hen in the flock hid her eggs in the priest's garden for a week before anyone found them. The stories are a patchwork of truth and fancy, but they soothe the children, and even you find yourself drifting on the gentle tide of memory. The house settles around you, the timbers creaking as they cool, the wind humming at the eaves. The cat hops up onto the bench, curling into a tight ball and purring so loudly you wonder how she manages to sleep at all. Your wife leans her head on your shoulder, sighing in contentment. "We made it through another day," she says, and you squeeze her hand in answer. Outside, the moonlight picks out the ragged line of the hedge, the shapes of the outbuildings, the far-off glint of water in the ditch. Somewhere in the dark, a fox slips through the grass, and you hope your fence is strong enough, your luck steady enough, to keep the animals safe until morning. You remember the old tale of the farmer who hung dried nettles above the barn door to keep away bad luck, and you wonder if you should do the same, just in case. As the fire burns low and the house grows quiet, you reflect on the day's peculiarities, the escape of Bess, the red yarn, the fairies that might or might not dance in the field. It all blurs together into the ordinary strangeness of life, the small rituals and odd beliefs that keep fear at bay and hope alive. You're tired, your hands ache, and tomorrow will bring its own share of chaos, but for now you're grateful, for the roof over your head, for the warmth beside you, for the familiar creak of the door and the laughter that lingers long after the chores are done. You draw the blanket tighter, listening to the soft breathing of your family, and as sleep edges closer, you think that maybe, just maybe, the magic of this life isn't in the big moments, but in the quiet, peculiar rituals that make you feel, if only for a little while, that all is well. Morning fades, and after the midday rest, the anticipation for market day builds. It's not a weekly event. Your village's market comes but once or twice a month, sometimes less if rains are heavy and the roads flood. This week, luck and weather are in your favour. You gather what little surplus you have, a dozen eggs, a wheel of cheese still soft and tangy from your wife's careful tending, a few sturdy onions, and, wrapped in cloth, a small bundle of dried herbs. Your wife tucks a tiny secret coin deep into her bodice, its surface smooth and worn from months of saving. It's the only spare penny in the house, and she says nothing of it to the children. The path to market winds through rutted lanes and between low mossy stone walls. You and your wife walk together, balancing baskets on hips, a child at each hand. The fields are dotted with neighbours, some ahead, some behind, all walking with the same weary, hopeful energy. The air is thick with the smell of mud and livestock, but beneath it you catch hints of excitement. The market is a lifeline, a pulse that reminds the village it is not alone. It's also a stage for showing off new wares, for rumours to grow in the telling, for old debts to be repaid, and new bargains to be struck. As you round the bend into the village square, the world expands. Stalls bloom like wildflowers, makeshift tables laid with bread, cloth, iron nails, jars of honey, and the odd trinket from somewhere far beyond your fields. A travelling merchant hawks ribbons the colour of peacock feathers. The butcher displays salt pork under a battered linen cloth, and you see with envy that he has a rare treat, a string of dried apples, which catch the sunlight like amber. Voices rise in a cheerful clamour, the babble of barter and laughter, gossip and boasts. Your children, wide-eyed, tug at your sleeves. The youngest begs for a sweet, and your wife exchanges a knowing glance with you. She's already decided how far that secret penny will go, certainly not to waste. You guide the children toward the baker's stall, drawn by the scent of fresh loaves, while your wife lingers by the cheese cellar. She haggles quietly, offering your own small wheel for a taste of the neighbour's best. Cheese is judged in silence, with a pinch of salt and a squint of the eye. Your wife's cheese is good, so good in fact, that it earns an approving nod from the neighbour, and you manage to swap for a generous hunk of a harder, older cheese, sharper than what you could ever make in your own kitchen. Barter is the way of things here. Coins are rare and precious. More often, you trade eggs for onions, wool for nails, laughter for a bit of gossip. Your wife hands over 2 eggs to an old woman who offers a fistful of fresh herbs in return. She slips a few into your basket, careful to save the best for herself. You swap a few onions for a bundle of kindling and a new ribbon for your daughter, blue as summer sky. Her smile is worth the small sacrifice of last winter's dried leeks. In the heart of the square, a group of monks stands near the church steps, their robes patched and their faces ruddy from the cold. They sell little, but they watch everything. The head monk, Father Abelard, calls out greetings in Latin, then in the local tongue, his voice both cheerful and commanding. He asks after your health, after the old cow, and when you mention your wife's cough, he promises to remember her in his prayers. He offers you a tiny vial of blessed water for a few pennies, but you shake your head politely. Your wife's herbal remedies have always done just as well, and besides, pennies are not for parting lightly. A sudden commotion erupts at the edge of the square. 2 boys tumble into the mud, scuffling over a dropped apple. Their mothers haul them up by their collars, and the argument ends as quickly as it began. A dog yips at a piglet, the piglet squeals, and everyone laughs. It's a noisy, chaotic harmony, this market life, a welcome break from the relentless quiet of your own fields. You spy a peddler with a tray of sweets, honey cakes and little nuts candied in sugar. The price is steep, but your wife's hand slips into her bodice and produces that single hidden coin. She glances at you, silent but firm, and you nod. The penny is traded for a single honey cake, which she breaks into 4 careful pieces for the children and herself, saving a crumb for you. The taste is golden and sharp, the memory of summer and long afternoons. The children lick their fingers, grinning, and your wife tucks the wrapper away, as if to hold on to a bit of the magic. The market is also where news travels fastest. The bailiff, round and officious, makes his way through the crowd, reminding everyone of rents due and the Lord's latest decrees. You listen with half an ear, your mind already tallying what you owe and how much you can stretch what's left in the cellar. You hear stories of the next village, how their barley rotted in the rain, how wolves took 2 sheep in one night. A stranger tells of distant lands, where oranges grow as big as fists and fish leap from rivers at a whistle. It's all wild tales, but they keep the market buzzing. In a quieter corner, your wife pauses at a stall where a quiet, pale woman sells small carvings and amulets. She fingers a charm shaped like a fish, carved from bone, and listens as the seller promises it brings luck in childbirth. Your wife smiles, thanks her, but moves on. You can see the longing in her eyes, not for another child perhaps, but for luck itself. You buy nothing, but your wife slips a sprig of dried lavender from the stall, a gift from the seller for good fortune. She tucks it behind her ear, the scent following her all the way home. Before you leave, you stop at the edge of the square to rest. Your children run circles around your legs, showing off their blue ribbon and sticky hands. Your wife counts your trade, satisfied with the exchanges. The air is heavy with the promise of rain, and you gather your things before the sky opens. You walk home slowly, baskets lighter but spirits buoyed, knowing you've done well today, if only for a little while. As you make your way back, your wife presses your hand and leans close, whispering that she's kept a tiny piece of honey cake tucked away, a secret to be shared later when the children are asleep. The path home feels easier with her beside you. Even the mud seems softer, the fields less bleak. You talk about what you've seen, the cheese that tasted of wildflowers, the ribbons brighter than any you've owned, the way the monks' singing echoed long after you left the square. Night begins to fall as you reach your cottage, and you unload your precious cargo. The house smells of bread and damp wool, and you set the bundles on the table. The children chatter about the market, their eyes bright with wonder, already dreaming of the next time. You and your wife sit together in the quiet, the candle burning low, the sweet aftertaste of honey cake lingering on your tongue. For a little while, the worries of taxes and tithes and weather are far away. You've bartered well, shared in the small joys of the crowd, and come home richer in laughter and stories, if not in coins. Your wife leans her head on your shoulder, and you listen to the rain begin, drumming soft and steady on the thatch above, a lullaby to end the day. There's a heaviness that settles into the air on the days when the bailiff is rumoured to be making his rounds. The market's laughter fades, and even the children's songs take on a quiet, wary tone. You wake with a tightness in your chest, aware of the tally in your mind, the barley you've set aside, the coins hidden beneath a loose floorboard, the eggs you hope to keep just out of sight. Your wife moves through the cottage with a similar vigilance, counting and recounting, whispering the names of saints under her breath as if one might intervene on your behalf. The bailiff arrives mid-morning, his cloak stiff with dried mud, his horse snorting and stamping on the packed earth outside your cottage. He is not cruel exactly, but he is methodical and immune to pleas for mercy. His ledger is thick and the feather of his quill sharp. He dismounts, nods to you with a practised politeness that's almost worse than a sneer, and steps into your cottage as if he owns it already. You greet him with the best smile you can muster, bowing your head, hands behind your back so he cannot see how tightly you're clenching them. Your wife brings out the tribute, 3 sacks of barley, a wedge of cheese, and the small clutch of eggs you set aside last night. She places them carefully on the table, standing straight and proud, refusing to let him see any fear. He inspects each item with a critical eye, weighing and recording with quick, neat notes. He asks about your yield, your livestock, the age of your cow. You answer as truthfully as you dare, keeping your voice steady, hoping he won't notice the patch of beans you harvested early and stored in a neighbour's barn for safekeeping. Taxes and tithes are a constant dance. You pay the Lord his share, the church its tithe, and still hope to keep enough for your family to last until the next harvest. Your wife is better at this than you are. She knows how to barter, how to hide, how to make a sack of barley appear heavier with a stone at the bottom, or how to set a few eggs aside in the thatch where the bailiff won't think to look. Today the ledger seems satisfied with what you offer. The bailiff accepts the tribute, marking your name with a single stroke, but he lingers, eyes darting around the cottage as if expecting more. He comments on the state of your fence, the cracked stone at the door, the number of chickens pecking in the yard. You nod, offering humble excuses, and your wife chimes in, her voice a soft blend of worry and respect. When the bailiff finally leaves, tribute in hand, you close the door with a sigh so deep it seems to empty your chest of everything but relief. Your wife rests her head on your shoulder for a moment, and you both stand in the middle of your small home, listening to the distant sound of the bailiff's horse disappearing down the lane. The children sense the tension, slipping into the room and clinging to your legs. You lift the youngest into your arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead, and tell her not to worry. She looks up at you with trusting eyes, believing every word. Your wife returns to the hearth, stirring the pot with extra vigour, as if she can chase the fear away with each turn of the spoon. Over the stew, you discuss what remains. You count your blessings. Still enough barley for porridge, the cow still in the barn, chickens still laying. Your wife mentions the story she heard last market, of a family who once tricked the tax collector by feeding their pig in the neighbour's sty and claiming it had been lost to wolves. She laughs, the sound sharp and bright. "Clever peasants always find a way," she says, and you smile, comforted by the hope that you might join their number. There are other stories too, whispered at market and by the fireside. A man who buried coins beneath his apple tree, swearing he'd dig them up only if the king himself came calling. A woman who swaddled her best hens in rags, declaring them sickly and unfit for tribute, only to sell their eggs the next week in secret. Your own father used to say that the best way to outwit the king's men was with a friendly face and a hidden pocket. Your wife is cautious. She knows the risks of being too clever. Tales are told of those who pushed their luck too far, a neighbour fined double, a family evicted from their cottage when the bailiff found hidden grain. Still, you cannot help but admire the small victories, the ingenuity born of necessity. In a world built on taxes and tithes, a little cunning is sometimes the only difference between a full winter and a hungry one. The afternoon wears on, the anxiety lingering like a shadow. You take comfort in the rhythm of chores, splitting wood, tending to the animals, mending the fence where the bailiff's horse knocked loose a stone. The children play nearby, their laughter a balm to your frayed nerves. Your wife hums a quiet tune, one she learned from her mother, and the world feels a little less heavy. As dusk settles, you gather by the fire. Supper is plain but filling, barley porridge with a pinch of salt, the last of the market cheese, and a cup of weak cider. You talk about the old legends, the clever peasants who fooled the king, the monks who kept their best apples hidden in hollow trees. Your wife tells the story of the village not far from here, where the women disguised their best bread as offerings for the saints, passing them around the church altar so the steward would never guess. The children listen wide-eyed, asking if the stories are true. You look at your wife and shrug. Some of them, you say. The rest are just good stories. Still, you hope they remember. In every legend is a grain of wisdom, a reminder that survival is more than just hard work. It's knowing when to bend, when to hide, when to laugh in the face of the Lord's men. After the meal, your wife produces a small loaf she saved from the market, sweetened with dried apples and honey. It's a rare treat, and you share it in silence, savouring every bite. The sweetness lingers, cutting through the bitterness of the day. The children drift off to sleep, their bellies full, and you and your wife sit together by the dying fire, the house wrapped in the hush of night. Before sleep, you kneel together, murmuring a prayer for protection, for abundance, for mercy in the days to come. Your wife lights a stub of candle and places it in the window, an old tradition to ward off ill luck. You watch the flame flicker, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and feel a cautious hope settle over you. In the darkness, you remember the clever peasants, the tricks and tales that have kept your kind alive for generations. You vow to be just as cunning, just as resilient, as those who came before. The world may be ruled by lords and priests, but here, in your small cottage, wit and love keep you strong. The afternoon is heavy with clouds, the sky a quilt of bruised grey. You can feel the change coming long before the first rumble of thunder. The air sharpens, carrying the scent of rain and the electric tang of storm. Your wife looks up from her mending, eyes narrowing at the shifting sky. Best get everything inside, she says, and you both spring into motion, the memory of last year's ruined hay fresh in your minds. You gather the animals close to the barn, chickens fluttering and clucking, sheep pressing together, the cow stomping with unease. Your wife moves quickly, her hands sure as she herds the youngest children inside and secures the shutters. You double-check every latch, stuffing rags in the worst of the window gaps, hoping the wind won't pry them loose this time. The wind begins its rise, gusting first as a whisper through the eaves, then gaining force, rattling the roof and shivering the walls. The first heavy drops spatter the thatch and earth, and you duck into the house just as the sky splits open. Rain pours in sheets, drumming on the roof, finding its way through old cracks. You set out bowls and pots to catch the leaks, patting the walls where damp creeps in. The storm is a living thing, loud and wild, hammering at your small world. Your wife stands at the hearth, coaxing the fire to life, her face golden in the flickering light. You watch her, thinking how storms make the world smaller, pressing you together, shutting out the rest of the village for a while. As you settle in, you recall the tale of the lucky bones, chicken wishbones hung above the door, their brittle forms a silent promise of hope. Your wife laughs when you mention it, but later, when she thinks you're not looking, you catch her tucking one above the lintel, her face solemn and thoughtful. You're reminded that everyone, in their own way, seeks a measure of control over fate, whether through prayers, garlic, or a chicken's bone. The night is quieter now, rain dripping from the eaves in slow, steady drops. The fire is low, casting long shadows, and the children's breathing is even and deep. You lean back, letting your mind drift. You think about the seasons, how the land can be cruel and kind, the storms that sweep away a summer's work or bring water to thirsty fields. You think about the strange beliefs that knit your community together, the invisible threads that connect you all, even when you pretend not to care. Your wife slips her hand into yours, squeezing gently. You look at her and see reflected in her eyes the same mix of fear and hope, resignation and defiance. Together you watch the last of the storm fade, knowing that tomorrow the sun will rise and the world will be washed clean, for a while at least. You rise, stirring the fire and tucking the children in more securely. Your wife adds a fresh log, its scent sweet and smoky, and together you whisper goodnight to the spirits, just in case they're listening. The wind outside carries away the last of the thunder, and in its place, the soft hush of rain becomes a lullaby. Before you sleep, you think again of how storms can bring out the worst and the best in people, the kindness of neighbours, the comfort of old stories, the resilience to start again. You remember that in another corner of the world, someone else is sitting by their own fire, hoping for safety, listening to the rain. The thought is strangely comforting. You're part of something larger, a family, a village, a long line of dreamers who trust in garlic, bones, and the power of a well-told story to see them through the night. Once the storm has wandered off into memory, and the cottage is returned to its familiar hush, you set about reclaiming a sense of normalcy. The air smells faintly of wet earth and wood smoke, an odd comfort after so much thunder. Your wife is already gathering up the bits of kindling and soggy rushes near the hearth, her hands moving with steady purpose, sleeves pushed high on her arms. You join her, inspecting the damage, a small puddle by the door where the rain found its way in, a stack of firewood scattered by a sudden gust, and of course the tunic you left hanging too close to the leaky wall, now damp as pond weed. With the children still bundled on their straw mat, you settle on the bench and pull the tunic into your lap, turning it over in your hands. The wool is rough and patched in half a dozen places, the elbow nearly worn through. You fetch your mending kit, a battered tin with a jumble of bone needles and balls of knotted thread. Each stitch is an act of patience, the needle working its slow path through the fabric. Your wife sits beside you, darning a hole in a sock with a skill that seems half magic, her fingers nimble even in the flickering firelight. Conversation comes quietly. She tells you that the miller's wife is convinced mice have taken over their larder, and you both trade theories on where the little bandits might be coming in. You joke that perhaps the mice have unionised and are plotting to move onto your stores next. As you stitch, your wife brings over a small crock filled with herbs, dried comfrey, a curl of willow bark, a twist of yarrow. She's always been something of a healer, trusted with scratches, burns and aches the way her mother was before her. She kneels beside you, inspecting the scrape on your palm from the afternoon's repairs. Should have used gloves, she scolds gently, though you both know there are none to be had until next Michaelmas. She cleans the cut, her touch gentle, then presses a poultice of crushed comfrey to the wound, binding it with a strip of linen torn from an old undertunic. There's something soothing in her remedies, a comfort that runs deeper than the herbs themselves. She hums under her breath, and the sound settles your nerves. You watch her mix a little honey into warm water for the children's cough, a trick learned from her grandmother. She whispers to the youngest, telling her the story of a knight who grew so fond of honey and herbs that he once tried to heal a dragon's sore paw. Your daughter drifts to sleep with a smile, dreams sweetened by stories and the promise of comfort. You turn your attention back to your own repairs, this time the handle of a wooden bucket that cracked in the cold. The wood needs soaking and binding. You fetch a strip of green willow from the store and wind it around the break, hoping it'll hold until you can trade for a new one at market. Your wife inspects your work, offers a few quiet suggestions, and together you debate whether it'll last until next harvest. In the corner, the cat pounces on a stray piece of yarn, batting it under the bench and out of reach. Later, your wife sets a pot on the fire, filling it with water, dried beans, and the last slivers of ham. She throws in a handful of sage and stirs, muttering a rhyme meant to keep the stew from sticking. You fetch a piece of wood for the fire, splitting it with the small hatchet. The chores are endless, but they bring a rhythm that settles the spirit, one job flowing into the next, each with its own familiar motions and small rewards. The rain has nearly stopped by now, leaving only a drip from the eaves and the soft rustle of wind. You take a moment to stand in the doorway, breathing in the damp, feeling the ache in your shoulders begin to ease. Your wife appears behind you, pressing a mug of hot broth into your hands. You sip it, savouring the warmth, grateful for her foresight in always saving a little extra for these chilly evenings. The children stir, coughing softly. Your wife checks on them, smoothing hair back from flushed cheeks, tucking the blanket more snugly around them. She mixes a concoction of honey and thyme, coaxing a spoonful into each mouth. The oldest wrinkles her nose but swallows dutifully. Your wife sits beside them, telling a story about the time she once tried to chase a fever away by hanging onions around her neck. The children giggle at the idea, the sound light and sweet in the small cottage. You turn to smaller repairs, a broken chair leg, a door latch that catches, the loose shutter that bangs when the wind rises. Each fix is temporary, but in this world, temporary often has to be enough. Your wife, meanwhile, checks the herbs drying on strings above the fire, separating those ready for storage from the ones that need a few more days. She crushes a few leaves between her fingers, the scent filling the air, and you realise just how much these little touches of green and gold mean through the long, grey months. Night falls gently, the storm's anger now just a memory. Supper is a quiet affair, stew ladled into wooden bowls, bread sliced thin, and the last of the dried pears shared among you all. The children eat sleepily, their heads nodding, and you and your wife share a smile across the table. She wipes the youngest's mouth, tucks a strand of hair behind her ear, and you marvel at her endless patience. Evenings like this, spent in the soft glow of firelight, feel almost sacred, a kind of peace carved out of hardship. After the meal, you and your wife sit together by the fire, each with a bit of mending in hand. She stitches a patch onto your son's tunic, telling you about her mother's tricks for making a patch last through more than one child. You recall your own father's warnings about letting too many chores pile up. A stitch in time saves 9, he'd say, though he never sewed a thing himself. Before bed, your wife brews one last cup of herbal tea, the fragrance filling the room. You watch her add a pinch of dried violet, a remedy for troubled dreams, she claims. She hands you a mug, her fingers brushing yours, eyes full of tired affection. You drink, the warmth seeping through you, calming the last nerves left from the storm. You tuck the children into bed, layering extra blankets and whispering soft reassurances. Your wife checks every door and shutter, placing her favourite broom across the threshold, a habit she claims keeps mischievous spirits from sneaking in. You let her be. Old ways have their power, and if it gives her peace, so much the better. She joins you in bed, her hand finding yours under the covers, and together you listen to the fire's last crackle and the gentle sigh of wind against the walls. Tonight, you sleep easier, knowing you've done all you can to mend what's broken and soothe what aches. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, wood to split, fields to check, 1,000 little tasks to keep the world from falling apart. But for now, you let your eyes close, warmed by the quiet presence of your wife, the steady breath of your children, and the fading storm outside your door. You rise in darkness, the air cool and still, and for a moment you listen to the quiet rhythm of your wife's breathing, the faint shuffle of a child turning in sleep. This is the deep night, that thin space between yesterday and tomorrow, where even the wind seems to hesitate. You pull the blanket close, savouring the last lingering warmth, then quietly slip from the bed. Your feet find the familiar path to the hearth, feeling for the cold flagstones, guiding yourself by memory and the faint glow of embers buried beneath last night's ash. The fire needs coaxing. You kneel, blowing gently until a thin snake of smoke curls upward, then feed it scraps of bark and dry moss. It catches, timid at first, then bolder, casting new shadows along the low beams. You hear your wife rise, footsteps soft as moth wings. She stands beside you, hair loose around her shoulders, shawl wrapped tight. In the half-light, you see the lines of tiredness on her face, the marks of years of laughter and worry, work and wonder. Together you move through the morning rituals. She checks the children, tucking them in, brushing a hand over their brows. You fetch the jug from the shelf, pour what's left of the cider into a battered cup, and share it in silence, feeling the liquid burn gently on the way down. Your wife lights a tallow candle, setting it on the table, its weak light battling the gloom. You murmur a prayer, words shaped more by hope than certainty, asking for safety and strength, for health and a gentle day. Dawn creeps in, slow and uncertain, painting the windows with the faintest blush of grey. Your wife opens the shutters just a crack, peering out at the world still sleeping beneath mist and dew. You both take a moment, breathing in the silence, feeling the rare peace that sometimes lingers before the day truly begins. It doesn't last. The first rooster crows, and the world stirs with it. You glance at each other and share a tired smile. Breakfast is simple. She ladles out a thin porridge, sweetened with a splash of yesterday's milk, and divides it carefully among the children. They wake one by one, faces creased with sleep, grumbling at the cold, pulling on tunics and boots with stiff fingers. You eat standing, watching the sky for any sign of sun, hoping for a mild day. Your wife wipes down the table, setting aside the scraps for the animals, and you see her eyes flicker toward the corner, where the larder sits half empty. It's not fear in her gaze, just calculation, the eternal weighing of what you have against what you'll need. When the meal is cleared, you kneel together on the hard-packed earth. It's a habit your wife insists upon. Prayer before work, prayers for the living and the dead, prayers for good weather and forgiving neighbours. She leads, voice soft but steady, and you echo her words. You pray for your parents, buried now beneath the yew tree beyond the fields, and for the children who didn't make it through the last harsh winter. You pray for forgiveness and patience, for enough rain and not too much, for mercy from the Lord's men and from fate. Afterwards, your wife rises and reaches for her cloak, readying herself for the day's first task. She's heading to the stream to fetch water, a heavy bucket in each hand. You insist on going with her, but she waves you off. Her step is quicker, she says, and you have other chores. You know better than to argue. Instead, you set about repairing the loose shutter that kept banging in the night. Your hands are still, careful, not wanting to wake the children again. With the chores underway, the world outside grows lighter. Your wife returns, cheeks pink from the air, arms trembling just a little from the weight of the buckets. You take them from her, pouring the cold water into the large clay jug beside the hearth. She hangs up her cloak, fingers numb, and you rub her hands between yours, blowing warm breath across her knuckles. You both smile, grateful for the small tenderness. The children tumble into the yard, still half asleep, wrestling boots onto muddy feet. Your wife stands by the door, arms folded, counting heads. She gives out tasks, one to gather kindling, another to feed the chickens, a third to check for eggs. You watch them scatter, grateful for their eagerness. Childhood here is brief, but full of purpose. You turn to the barn, shovel in hand, ready to muck out the stall before the sun has climbed too high. Later, as the day lengthens, you and your wife share the quiet work of repair, mending a basket, patching a torn sleeve, sweeping the dust and straw from the corners. These moments are slow and companionable, your hands moving in rhythm, your voices low. She tells you about a neighbour's child, struck by fever but recovering, and you share a story of a field mouse caught in the storeroom, its escape a minor miracle. She smiles, and you feel the heaviness of the morning begin to ease. With midday comes a sense of pause. You sit together on the bench near the fire, bowls of soup cradled in your hands. The youngest curls up beside you, eyelids drooping, soothed by the heat and the hush. Your wife braids the girl's hair, fingers nimble, whispering old rhymes to keep the tangles at bay. You remember when your mother did the same, singing lullabies in a language you barely recall. Outside, the world grows brighter. A flock of crows circles the bare tree by the road, calling to each other in rough, joyous voices. The neighbours are at work, voices and laughter drifting on the air. Your wife stands, wiping her hands, and steps outside to call greetings across the lane. There's talk of the priest's visit next Sunday, of rumours from the market, of the fox seen near the orchard. You join her, leaning on the doorframe, nodding to Mary as she passes with her eldest, both arms full of kindling. In the afternoon, you gather with your wife to set things right, checking the locks, pulling tight the shutters, setting fresh rushes by the threshold. She lights a candle at the small altar, its flame bright against the dusk. The children kneel, hands folded, voices high and wavering as they join in prayer. Your wife murmurs blessings in the old way, words her grandmother taught her, asking for protection from misfortune, for a peaceful night and dreams unmarred by fear. When night falls, you feel the old unease. Shadows pool in the corners, and the wind rattles the eaves. Your wife moves through the house, checking every latch twice, tucking stray hair beneath her cap. She listens at the window for unfamiliar sounds, for the soft crunch of footsteps that might mean more than a stray dog or wandering fox. You remember the stories you heard as a child, of spirits that roamed on moonless nights, of thieves and wolves that crept through the hedges, of curses that could settle over a house like a shroud. But you have each other, and you have faith. You gather together in the main room, children curled on their pallet, wife beside you, the cat stretched long and lazy at your feet. The fire is low, its embers glowing, casting a gentle light across your faces. Your wife whispers good night, voice steady, and you find comfort in the ritual. The wind howls, but inside the cottage, you are safe. For now, for tonight. You lie beside your wife, the darkness deep and full, and listen to the house settle. Boards creak, the fire sighs, and beyond the door, the world slips into shadow. You close your eyes, heart steady, knowing that whatever fears linger in the night, you will face them together. Faith and habit, love and stubborn hope, these are your guardians until the dawn. The cottage is a world of slow shadows as the last embers dim, a hush settling over everything, even your thoughts. The air carries the earthy scent of straw and cooling ash, the gentle sounds of sleep surrounding you, your children breathing softly on their pallet, the creak of the beams as the house settles into the hush of midnight. Your wife lies beside you, her back curved against your own, the faint warmth of her body all the shield you need against the last chill fingers of night. With the day's labours finally behind you, sleep creeps in quietly, a gentle tide that pulls you away from the aches and the little worries, the unfinished chores and the hopes you dare not say aloud. You linger in that space between waking and dreams, remembering the faces of those you've lost, parents gone to their rest under the yew tree, neighbours whose laughter once rang out at harvest, even the old sheepdog that followed you for years before his bones grew too tired. You think of the world as it was when you were a child, the colours brighter, the summers endless, the problems smaller or at least further away. Regret is a subtle ache, lost friends, lost chances, the little things you wished you'd said to your father before he slipped away in his sleep. Your hand finds your wife's in the dark, her fingers curling around yours, grounding you here in the present, reminding you that the world is still turning, that morning will come. Outside, the wind tugs gently at the eaves, a low song that seems to rise and fall with your breathing. You hear the distant bark of a dog, the mournful call of an owl, the occasional rustle in the hedgerow. These sounds are your lullaby, as familiar as your own heartbeat. The village, too, sleeps, windows dark, chimneys cold, the fields silvered with mist. It is a quiet shared by every home, every family huddled close against the world's uncertainty. Somewhere a candle flickers in a neighbour's window, its light a promise that you're not alone, not even in the darkest hours before dawn. Sleep overtakes you at last, and you drift down into dreams. They are soft-edged, a tapestry woven from memories and hope. You find yourself walking the fields as a child, your father's hand strong in yours, the wheat tall and golden, the sky impossibly blue. You see your children laughing, chasing geese beneath the apple trees, your wife's face bright with pride as she lifts a loaf of fresh bread from the oven. Sometimes, darker shapes move at the edges of your dreams, worries about next year's harvest, the chill of a hard winter, the old fear of sickness that comes in the night. But you chase them away, focusing on the light, the warmth, the sound of voices calling you home. The night is long, but not endless. In the dark you feel the world turning, the gentle pull of time carrying you forward. Your wife stirs, murmuring your name, and you turn to her, pressing your forehead to hers. You share no words, just a silent promise that you'll face whatever comes together, as you always have. The children sleep on, lost in their own dreaming worlds, safe for now from hunger and worry. As the sky outside begins to pale, the first bird sings, a high, sweet note that breaks the silence and welcomes the dawn. You open your eyes, blinking against the faint glow that seeps through the window. Your wife is awake beside you, her gaze soft and tired, but full of quiet hope. You watch the light grow, touching the rushes on the floor, gilding the rough beams overhead, painting your small world in gentle gold. You rise, stretching the soreness from your shoulders, and pull on your patched tunic. The air is chilly, but full of promise. Your wife moves quietly, gathering the children, brushing sleep from their hair, pressing a kiss to each brow. The day begins as it always does, with hunger, with chores, with the long list of tasks that will carry you to the next dusk. Yet something feels different, as if the storm has washed the world clean, as if hope itself has grown new roots overnight. You step outside, boots crunching on the dew-damp earth, and stand for a moment in the hush. The fields stretch before you, green and gold beneath the rising sun, every furrow a testament to your labour, every stone and weed and crooked fence a sign that you have survived, that you will go on surviving. Your wife stands beside you, hand in yours, the children clustered around your legs, blinking in the new light. You look at each of them, your family, your reason, your hope, and feel a gratitude that is almost too big for words. The world is not gentle, and you know this better than most. There will be days of hunger and days of plenty, storms that batter your roof and winters that gnaw at your bones. You will worry and you will weep, and sometimes you will laugh so hard your sides ache. You will watch your children grow, mark their heights on the cottage wall, teach them to plant and reap and mend and dream. You will argue with your wife, and then, later, make peace in the quiet glow of firelight. You will remember those you have lost, and find comfort in the memories that linger soft as the last light of evening. But for now, in this fragile golden dawn, you are together. The cottage is quiet, the fields waiting, the day stretched out ahead like a story you haven't yet read. You breathe in deeply, filling your lungs with the scent of earth and hope, and let yourself believe, just for a moment, that all will be well. Let your shoulders relax, let your eyes drift closed if they haven't already. The world turns, and another day begins, slow and strange and full of possibility. You are not alone, not now, not ever, held in the gentle arms of morning, rocked by the rhythms of work and love and dreaming. With each breath you let go a little more, surrendering to sleep, trusting that the sun will rise again, that you will meet it hand in hand, that you will always have this, your home, your hope, your slow and stubborn, beautiful life.